I've been called many things in my 72 years. Stubborn, independent, a little too old-fashioned for modern times. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what my own son-in-law said to me on Christmas night. Not in private. Not during some heated argument. No. He stood up at the dinner table, looked me dead in the eyes, lifted his wine glass in front of his millionaire parents, his business associates, and worst of all, in front of my own daughter, and said, "You're a pathetic freeloader, Tracy. Always taking, never giving. Honestly, it's embarrassing." And they all laughed. Even my daughter, Wendy, managed a small, tight smile. The kind you give when you don't want to upset your husband, the kind that breaks a mother's heart into 1,000 silent pieces. I sat there at the far end of that long table, feeling the heat rise behind my eyes, my chest tightening. But I didn't say a word. At my age, I've learned that silence can be the sharpest weapon you own. I simply folded my napkin, kept my spine straight, and waited. What Andrew didn't know, what none of them sitting around that expensive table knew, was that in that exact moment, while those people smiled and sipped their imported wine, I remembered something. A secret I'd kept buried for 15 years. A truth that would shatter their perfect little world if it ever came to light. A truth about his wealthy parents and me. So I stayed quiet, because I knew that by morning, everything was going to change. But let me back up a moment. Before I tell you what I did that night after I left, before I tell you why Andrew woke up to 52 missed calls the next morning, I need you to understand how I got to that table in the first place. And hey, before I go any further, I'm curious. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. I love hearing from people all over the world, and if this story hits home for you, if you've ever been dismissed or underestimated by your own family, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Now, back to Christmas. My name is Tracy Collins. I'm 72 years old, and I'm not nearly as helpless as my son-in-law likes to pretend. Wendy had begged me to come early that day. "Mom, just relax tonight, okay? Don't worry about the cooking, just enjoy yourself," she'd said on the phone a week before Christmas. Her voice sounded bright but strained, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. I should have known something was off. Andrew and Wendy live in a large house in Lake Forest, just north of Chicago. They like to tell people it's modest, but there's nothing modest about a driveway that needs its own landscaping crew. Andrew's parents, Walter and Diane Moore, live in an even bigger house nearby. Between the two couples, they love nothing more than reminding everyone within earshot that they are self-made. Funny thing about people who say that, they usually leave out a few key helpers from the story. When I arrived that evening, the house looked like something out of a magazine. White furniture that no one was allowed to actually sit on. An oversized Christmas tree in the corner with not a single ornament out of place. Everything perfect, everything cold. Wendy greeted me at the door with a quick hug, more politeness than warmth. "Mom, you look nice," she said, already glancing over my shoulder toward the driveway, waiting for the next guest. I walked into the dining room, and that's when I noticed it. The table was set for 10 people. Fine china. Heavy silver cutlery. Enough glasses at each place setting to confuse anyone who didn't grow up pretending money mattered more than manners. I looked for my name card. It was at the far end of the table, alone. For years, I'd always sat next to Wendy. That was my spot. Close enough to squeeze her hand under the table when she got nervous. Close enough to whisper little jokes when Andrew started bragging about things no one had asked about. But tonight, my daughter's seat was between Andrew and his father. My card had been placed as far away from the family as the table allowed. "Oh," I said quietly. "You changed the seating." Wendy fussed with a napkin, refusing to look at me. "It's just for tonight, Mom. Walter wants to talk to Andrew about expanding the business, and it's easier if they're sitting together." "They can't talk with me near you?" I asked. My voice stayed calm. 35 years of working with patients and families at Cook County Hospital taught me how to keep my tone steady under pressure. Wendy didn't answer. She just hurried off toward the kitchen. The guests started arriving in waves. First came Walter and Diane, dressed like they'd just stepped out of a luxury magazine spread. Walter shook my hand as if we'd only met once or twice before, not at countless family gatherings over the years. Diane Eyre kissed my cheek and complimented Wendy's decorations loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. Then 2 business associates of Andrew's showed up, men in tailored jackets who smelled like expensive cologne and entitlement. I was introduced as Wendy's mom and promptly forgotten. We all sat down at the table. I took my place at the far end, isolated. One of the associates sat across from me, and my grandchildren, Lily and James, were placed on either side. "Nana, sit by us," Lily said, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Maybe later, sweetheart," Andrew cut in smoothly. "We're keeping the seating as planned tonight." He gave me a tight little smile, as if we were sharing some inside joke. I smiled back like we were not. Dinner began, and the food was beautiful. Wendy had clearly worked hard on the presentation, but nobody looked at her when they complimented the meal. Everything was about Andrew and his vision. Everything was about success and legacy and business growth. Walter went on about building empires. Diane kept dropping names of people I'd only ever seen in newspaper articles. The business associates nodded along, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, agreeing with opinions that didn't deserve agreement. At one point, one of the associates glanced down the table at me. "So, Tracy," he said, clearly trying to be polite, "what do you do?" "I'm retired," I answered. "I worked for 35 years in hospital administration at Cook County." He nodded vaguely, his eyes already drifting back toward Andrew. It was clear that my past, my work, my entire life didn't count for much in this room. The conversation moved on without me. I looked at my grandchildren. Lily was pushing peas around her plate, bored. James kept glancing between the adults, sensing the tension even if he couldn't name it. These were good kids. Sweet kids, but they were learning, right here at this table, that some people matter more than others. The real moment came with dessert. Andrew had been drinking steadily all evening, and his face had taken on that flushed look he gets when he's feeling bold. Walter lifted his wine glass and announced, "To family." Everyone murmured agreement. Then Andrew stood up. His smile stretched too wide. "I'd like to add to that," he said, holding his glass high. His eyes found mine from across that long, polished table. My stomach tightened. "You know," he continued, his voice carrying across the room, "my parents built everything they have from nothing, absolutely nothing. I've worked myself to the bone to keep growing what they started. Wendy helps, of course, keeping the home running, supporting me in every way." He gestured broadly. "Some of us really pull the weight around here." His eyes locked onto me. "And some people," he shrugged dramatically, pausing for effect, "are just along for the ride." The table went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on that expensive carpet. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my face still. "Andrew," Wendy said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. He waved her off. "Oh, come on, honey. Let's just be honest for once." He gestured toward me with his wine glass, and I watched the dark liquid swirl. "Tracy here means well, I'm sure, but she's been leaning on us for years now, always needing help, always needing support. At some point, that stops being family and starts being, well, freeloading, doesn't it?" Walter snorted into his glass. "Every family has one," he muttered. The men laughed. One of the associates actually whistled softly, like Andrew had just told the punchline to a good joke. Diane smirked over the rim of her wine glass. I looked at my daughter. Wendy stared down at her plate. She didn't say a word, not one single word in my defense. Lily's eyes went wide, staring at me like she was waiting for me to do something, say something. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I could have shouted. Lord knows I wanted to. I could have listed, one by one, every single thing I had done for this family. The babysitting, the meals I'd cooked when Wendy was too exhausted, the nights I sat up with sick children while Andrew went to networking events and business dinners. But none of that mattered in that moment. Because the biggest thing I'd ever done for Walter and Diane, they didn't even know about. And that's what kept me calm. "Thank you for the toast," I said, my voice steady and even. That was very clear. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. Then I stood up, smoothing down my dress. "Mom, where are you going?" Wendy whispered, finally looking at me. "I'm not feeling well," I replied. "I think I'll go home." I waited, just for a second, waited to see if anyone would stop me, if anyone would stand up and say, "Wait, this isn't right." Nobody moved. Not one person followed me to the door. I walked through that beautiful house, past the perfect tree, past the white furniture, and out into the cold December night. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car, but I didn't let myself cry. Not yet. I drove through the quiet streets, Christmas lights blinking in windows, families gathered in warm living rooms. My mind was racing, but not with hurt, not with tears. I was remembering a file that had crossed my desk 15 years ago, remembering the hours I'd spent, the strings I'd pulled, the favors I'd called in. Remembering how I'd saved Walter and Diane from losing everything when they had nowhere else to turn. And remembering the metal box on the top shelf of my hall closet, the one with a folder inside. A folder with their names on it. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, my hands had stopped shaking. I sat in my car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, and I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. Andrew thought I was helpless. He thought I was a burden who had nothing to offer, nothing to give. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I got out of my car, locked it, and walked to my front door with my spine straight and my head high. Inside, I hung up my coat, put the kettle on, and then I walked straight to the hall closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down that metal box. The folder inside had 3 words written in my own handwriting: Walter and Diane Moore. I carried it to my kitchen table, sat down, and opened it. What happened next would change everything. The papers inside that folder were organized, neat, exactly how I'd left them 15 years ago. Hospital case files, email printouts, billing records, letters from the foundation. Every single piece of evidence documenting what I'd done. I spread them across my kitchen table and let myself remember. It was late spring, back in 2008. I was working as a senior administrator in the billing and ethics office at Cook County Hospital. My job was to handle the complex cases, the ones where insurance didn't quite cover what was needed, where families got caught between medical necessity and financial reality. Most days, I looked at files for people I'd never met, strangers whose lives had been turned upside down by illness or injury. I did what I could within the system, but there were limits, always limits. Then one afternoon, a file landed on my desk with a yellow urgent tag attached. The name at the top made me pause. Walter Moore. I opened it and started reading. Car accident, serious spinal injuries. He'd need surgery, extensive physical therapy, possibly multiple procedures over the coming year. The medical bills were already climbing into 6 figures, and his insurance company was fighting the claims, arguing about what was truly necessary versus what was elective. The caseworker's notes were blunt. Without intervention, the hospital will likely pursue a lien on the family home. Patient may face bankruptcy. I sat back in my chair, processing. Then I saw the spouse's name. Diane Moore. Maiden name, Hartley. That name hit me like a physical thing. Diane Hartley. I pulled out my reading glasses and looked at the file more carefully. Date of birth, place of birth. A small town in southern Illinois, the same town where I'd grown up, though we'd been there years apart. Her father was Richard Hartley. And just like that, I was 23 years old again, standing in my parents' tiny kitchen, watching my mother cry because we didn't have enough money to keep the house. My father had been out of work for 6 months. The bank was sending letters. We were 2 weeks away from losing everything. Then Richard Hartley had shown up at our door. He was a machinist, not a wealthy man, but he had some savings. He'd heard through the community grapevine that we were struggling. He knocked on our door one evening, hat in his hands, and told my father he'd like to help. No contract, he'd said. No interest. Pay me back when you can. Or don't. Either way is fine. My father had tried to refuse, but Richard wouldn't hear it. He wrote a check right there in our kitchen, enough to cover 3 months of mortgage payments and give my dad breathing room to find work. We paid him back eventually, every penny. But that moment, that kindness from someone who barely knew us, it stayed with me my whole life. It shaped how I saw the world, how I saw people. Richard Hartley had passed away a few years before this file crossed my desk. I'd seen the obituary, but his daughter was here in these papers, and she was about to lose everything. I couldn't let that happen. I sat in my office that day, looking at Walter and Diane's file, and I made a decision. Not because anyone asked me to, not because I'd get recognition or thanks, but because a long time ago, someone had helped my family when we had nowhere else to turn. And sometimes, that's what you do. You pass it forward. The work started immediately. I pulled the file and began going through every line, every code, every insurance rejection. I stayed late that night, and the night after, and the night after that. I made calls to the insurance company, argued with billing departments, found loopholes and exceptions that others had missed. I contacted the hospital foundation and explained the case. They had a small emergency fund for situations exactly like this, but it required paperwork, justification, board approval. I wrote it all up, presented it myself, got the funding approved. Then I did something unusual. I structured the help so it appeared to come from an anonymous donor. The foundation would cover a portion. The billing adjustments I'd negotiated would handle the rest. But there would be no name attached, no one for the Moores to thank or feel indebted to. I worked on that case for over 40 hours, all of it off the clock, none of it required by my job. I involved my supervisor only when absolutely necessary for signatures and approvals. I made sure the paper trail showed the foundation's generosity and the hospital's flexibility, but my name stayed buried in administrative notes that no one would ever read. By the time I finished, Walter's surgery was approved and covered. The lien on their home was withdrawn. Their financial crisis was over. The caseworker sent me a brief email. "However you did this, thank you. This family was saved." I printed that email and put it in a folder, along with copies of every document, every communication, every piece of the puzzle. I wasn't planning to ever use it. I just kept records. That was my nature. I wrote Walter and Diane Moore on the front and put it in a metal box at home. And then I never told another soul. Not my friends, not my daughter, not even Walter and Diane themselves. They received letters from the hospital and the foundation explaining that an anonymous donor had stepped in, that their case had been reviewed and adjustments made. They never knew it was me. Over the years, I'd see their names occasionally. Walter started a business, and it grew. They became successful, then wealthy. They bought the big house. They joined the country club and the charity boards. I was happy for them. Truly. I never expected gratitude because they didn't know I was the one who'd helped. That was the point. But I also never expected to watch their son marry my daughter and treat me like garbage. I never expected to sit at their Christmas table and be called a freeloader in front of people who owed me everything and didn't even know it. Now, sitting in my quiet kitchen with those papers spread before me, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not rage, not bitterness. Just a cold, clear sense of purpose. They wanted to know who contributes and who takes. They wanted to draw lines between valuable people and burdens. Fine. I would show them exactly where those lines really were. I closed the folder, picked up my phone, and started making a list of names. Pastor Green. He'd been there when the foundation first got involved. He knew parts of the story. The hospital foundation director, retired now, but still active in the community. And a reporter. Someone who covered human interest stories, who understood that sometimes the most powerful narratives are the ones people tried to keep quiet. By morning, the truth was going to be exactly where it needed to be. Out in the open. I made myself a cup of tea and sat back down at the table. The clock on my kitchen wall read just past 10 in the evening. Most people would be winding down by now, getting ready for bed after a holiday dinner. Not me. I opened my laptop, an old, reliable thing I'd bought years ago, and pulled up my contacts. Then I took out a notebook and started writing. Not frantically, not with shaking hands. Just careful, methodical notes. 3 names went at the top of the page. Pastor Michael Green. He'd been at the church for over 20 years. He'd been involved with the hospital foundation back when Walter needed help. He didn't know all the details, but he knew enough. More importantly, he knew the Moores. He'd watched them build their reputation in the community, seen them at every charity event and fundraiser, always front and center, always making sure people knew they were generous. He also had a congregation full of people who looked up to Walter and Diane as pillars of the community. The second name was Janet Riley, former director of the hospital foundation. She'd retired 3 years ago, but she'd been the one who approved the emergency funding for Walter's medical bills. She had the paperwork. She'd signed off on everything. She knew exactly how much work had gone into saving that family. The third name was the one that would really matter. David Brown. He worked for the local newspaper, covering community interest stories. I'd met him once at a hospital fundraiser years back. He was the kind of reporter who actually cared about people, not just headlines. He'd written several pieces about quiet acts of generosity, about people who helped without seeking credit. This story would be right in his wheelhouse. I went through the documents one more time, organizing them into 3 neat stacks, one for Pastor Green, one for Janet, one for David. Each stack told the same story from a slightly different angle, but the core truth was there in black and white. The insurance denials, the billing crisis, the lien notice on their home, the foundation's emergency intervention, the administrative hours logged under my employee number, the follow-up reports showing the case resolved, and my handwritten notes from that time, documenting every phone call, every negotiation, every favor I'd called in to make it all work. I made copies of everything. My little home printer hummed away for nearly 30 minutes, spitting out page after page. I organized each set into a folder, wrote names on the tabs, and set them in a row on my table. Then I drafted emails. The first one was to Pastor Green. I kept it simple. Michael, I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out because something happened tonight that I think you should know about. I've attached some documents that tell a story I've kept private for 15 years. I think it's time that story came to light. Would you be available to talk tomorrow? Respectfully, Tracy Collins. I attached scanned copies of the key documents and saved the email as a draft. I'd send it first thing in the morning. The second email went to Janet. Janet, it's Tracy Collins from the hospital. I hope retirement is treating you well. I'm writing because I need your help with something important. You approved an emergency case back in 2008 for a family named Moore. I was the administrator who worked on that case. I've attached the documentation. The family has done very well since then, but they don't know who helped them. I think it's time they found out. Can we talk? Best, Tracy. Another draft saved. The third email, to David Brown, required more thought. Reporters need a hook, something that makes a story worth telling. I couldn't just dump documents on him and expect him to care. I stared at the blank email for a long moment. Then I started typing, Mr. Brown, my name is Tracy Collins. I'm a retired hospital administrator, and I have a story you might find interesting. 15 years ago, I helped save a local family from financial ruin after a medical crisis. I did it anonymously, and they've never known who stepped in. They've since become quite successful and well known in the community. Tonight, at a family dinner, I was publicly insulted and called a freeloader by their son in front of his parents, the very people whose home and future I once saved. I have all the documentation. I think this story speaks to something important about gratitude, dignity, and how we treat people when we don't know the whole story. Would you be interested in talking? Tracy Collins. I read it over 3 times. It was honest. It wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. It simply laid out the facts. I attached the scanned documents and saved it as a draft. 3 emails. 3 people who could help the truth find its way into the light. I wasn't looking for revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. But I also wasn't going to let them keep treating me like I was worthless, like I'd never contributed anything, like I was some burden they had to carry. They built their lives on a foundation I'd helped pour, and they didn't even know it. Now they would. I closed my laptop and looked at the 3 folders sitting on my table. Tomorrow morning, I'd send those emails. By tomorrow afternoon, conversations would start happening. Questions would be asked. Documents would be reviewed. And by tomorrow night, Walter and Diane Moore would begin to understand exactly who had been sitting at the far end of their son's table. The woman they'd allowed their son to mock. The woman who'd saved them. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and went to bed. For the first time in hours, I felt calm. Tomorrow, the truth would start moving. And once truth starts moving, nothing can stop it. I woke up at 6 the next morning, which is early even for me. The sun hadn't come up yet, and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I made coffee, got dressed, and sat down at my kitchen table. The 3 folders were still there, exactly where I'd left them. The emails were still saved as drafts on my laptop. I opened the computer and stared at the screen. This was the moment. Once I hit send, there would be no taking it back. The truth would be out there, moving through the world, touching lives, changing things. My finger hovered over the mouse. Then I thought about Andrew's face last night, that smug smile, the way he gestured at me with his wine glass like I was some kind of exhibit he was showing off to his friends. Pathetic freeloader. I clicked send on all 3 emails. The whoosh sound of each one leaving my inbox felt final, permanent. Like closing a door I'd kept propped open for 15 years. I sat back and sipped my coffee, waiting. Pastor Green called at 8:30. "Tracy." His voice came through the phone, warm but serious. "I just read your email, all of it." "Good morning, Michael," I said calmly. "I had no idea." He continued, "I knew the foundation had helped the Moores back then. I knew there was an anonymous donor involved, but I never knew it was you. Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because it wasn't about recognition," I told him. "They needed help. I was in a position to give it. That should have been the end of the story." There was a pause on the line. I could hear him breathing, thinking, "What happened at that dinner?" he asked quietly. I told him. Not dramatically, just the facts, the seating arrangement, the toast, Andrew's words, the laughter, my daughter's silence. When I finished, Pastor Green was quiet for a long moment. "Tracy, I'm so sorry," he finally said. "That's not how families should treat each other. That's not how anyone should be treated. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy," I said. "I'm telling you because I think it's time people knew the truth, the whole truth, about who gave and who took, about who built that family's foundation." "You want me to say something?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I want you to do whatever you think is right," I replied. "You've seen them at church every Sunday for years. You've watched them accept praise for their generosity. You know how the community sees them. I'm just giving you the facts. What you do with them is up to you." He was quiet again. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind. "The Moores will be at service on Sunday," he said slowly. "They always are." "I know. If this comes out, it's going to be difficult for them. For Andrew especially." "Yes," I agreed. "It will be. But they should know," he continued, his voice growing firmer. "The community should know. We talk all the time about gratitude and humility and honoring those who help us. This is a real example of what happens when we forget those values." "I thought you might see it that way," I said. "I'm going to need to verify some of these documents," he told me. "I need to make sure everything is accurate before I do anything public." "Of course. Call Janet Riley at the foundation. She signed off on everything. Her number is in the email." "I will. And Tracy?" "Yes. Thank you for trusting me with this. I know it can't have been easy to keep this secret for so long." "It was easier than you'd think," I said. "Until last night, I never regretted staying quiet. But there's a difference between being humble and letting people walk all over you." "There certainly is," he agreed. We talked for a few more minutes. He told me he'd reach out to Janet, review the documents carefully, and think about how best to address this. He didn't make any promises about what he'd do, but I could hear in his voice that something had shifted. He'd seen the Moores one way for years. Now, he was seeing them another way. Truth has a way of doing that. After we hung up, I sat at my table and waited. My phone was silent for about an hour. Then Janet Riley called. "Tracy Collins," she said when I answered. I haven't heard that name in years. Michael Green just called me asking about the Moore case from 2008. I imagine he did, I said. Why now? She asked directly. Why bring this up after all this time? So I told her too. The dinner, the insult, the laughter. When I finished, she let out a long breath. Those ungrateful people, she said, anger sharp in her voice. Do they have any idea what you did for them? No, I said simply. But they're about to. Good, Janet said firmly. I'm sending Michael every document we have. Copies of everything. Time logs, approval forms, funding records, the whole file. If he wants to tell this story, I want to make sure he tells it right. Thank you, Janet. Don't thank me. You saved that family. The least the world can do is know about it. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and watched the morning sun come through my window. 2 down, 1 to go. And then the real show would begin. David Brown from the newspaper called me just before noon. Mrs. Collins, he said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. I read your email. Twice, actually. This is quite a story. It's all documented, I told him. I can see that. These scans are very thorough. Hospital records, foundation approvals, billing adjustments. You kept everything. I worked in administration for 35 years, Mr. Brown. Keeping records was part of my job. May I ask you something directly? His voice shifted, becoming more careful. What do you want to happen here? Are you looking for an apology? Public recognition? What's the goal? It was a fair question. A good reporter would ask it. I want the truth out there, I said simply. For 15 years, I've watched this family build their reputation on a foundation they don't even know exists. I've watched them accept praise for being self-made, for pulling themselves up without help. And that would be fine. Except last night they made it very clear what they think of people who need support. They made it clear what they think of me. The freeloader comment. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. This is going to be a difficult story for them, especially if it goes public. The truth often is, I replied. Give me a day to verify the details and reach out to some sources. If everything checks out, I'd like to run this as a feature. Would you be willing to be interviewed? If necessary, yes. I'll be in touch. After he hung up, I looked at the clock. It was 12:15. I'd sent those emails less than 4 hours ago, and already 3 people were moving, asking questions, pulling threads. But there was one more call I needed to make. I pulled up my contacts and found the number for the Riverside Community Foundation. Walter Moore sat on their board. He'd been there for years, always showing up in photos at their fundraising events, always giving speeches about the importance of giving back to the community. I'd seen the newsletter just last month. His picture was on the front page, standing next to some local business owners, all of them holding an oversized check for a children's hospital wing. The foundation prided itself on supporting people in medical crisis. How fitting. I dialed the main number. Riverside Community Foundation. This is Angela speaking. How may I help you? Hello, Angela. My name is Tracy Collins. I'm trying to reach someone on the executive board. It's regarding a matter of donor transparency. May I ask what this is in reference to? It's about one of your board members, Walter Moore. I have information about his own history with charitable medical assistance that I believe the board should be aware of. There was a pause. 1 moment, please. Soft music played while I waited. I looked out my kitchen window at the gray December sky. This is Martin Bradford, Executive Director. How can I help you, Miss Collins? I explained who I was, briefly outlined what I'd done for Walter and Diane 15 years ago, and mentioned that I had complete documentation. I'm not calling to cause trouble, I told him, but your foundation raises money to help people in medical crisis. Walter Moore sits on your board and speaks publicly about the importance of that mission. I think your board should know that he was once on the receiving end of exactly that kind of help. Anonymous help. Help he's never acknowledged because he doesn't know where it came from. I see, Martin said slowly. And why are you bringing this to our attention now? Because last night his son called me a freeloader in front of Walter and his wife. They laughed. They agreed. And I think it's important for people who speak about gratitude and giving back to actually understand what it means to receive. Martin was quiet for a long moment. Would you be willing to send me this documentation? I can have it to you within the hour. Please do. I'll need to review it with the board chair, but if what you're saying is accurate, this is certainly something we need to discuss. We take our mission very seriously, and we expect our board members to embody the values we promote. I understand completely. Ms. Collins, may I ask, are you planning to make this information public? A reporter is already looking into it, I said honestly. I wanted to give your foundation the courtesy of knowing before it becomes a news story. He let out a slow breath. I appreciate that. Please send those documents to my direct email. I'll be reviewing them this afternoon. I hung up and immediately forwarded all the scanned files to Martin Bradford's email address. Then I sat back in my chair. 3 conversations. 3 different people now knew the truth. Pastor Green would be thinking about Sunday's service. Janet Riley was providing additional documentation. David Brown was investigating the story. And now the foundation board would be reviewing Walter's history. The pieces were moving into place. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made threats. I hadn't lied or exaggerated or manipulated. I'd simply told the truth to people who had a right to know it. And now that truth was out there, spreading quietly through the community like roots growing beneath the surface. By tomorrow, those roots would break through the ground. By Sunday, everyone would see exactly what had been hidden for 15 years. I made myself lunch, a simple sandwich, and sat at my table eating slowly. My phone sat silent beside me, but I knew that silence wouldn't last. Soon, very soon, it would start ringing. And when it did, I wouldn't answer. Not yet. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them start to realize that the woman they'd dismissed so easily had more power than they'd ever imagined. The truth was coming, and nothing could stop it now. David Brown called back at 4:30 that afternoon. Mrs. Collins, I've spent the last few hours making calls and reviewing documents. I spoke with Janet Riley at the hospital foundation. I spoke with Pastor Green. I even reached out to 2 former colleagues of yours from Cook County Hospital who remember the Moore case. And? I asked calmly. And everything you told me is completely accurate. In fact, it's more impressive than your email suggested. You worked on that case for over 6 weeks. You involved multiple departments, negotiated with insurance companies, secured foundation funding, and restructured their entire billing situation. According to your former supervisor, you probably saved them from bankruptcy. I did what was necessary. You did more than necessary, he corrected gently. You went far beyond your job description, and you did it anonymously. Why? I looked out my window at the street below. A young mother was walking with a stroller, bundled against the cold. Because Diane's father once helped my family when we were in trouble, I said. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't want recognition. He just saw people who needed help, and he gave it. I learned something from that. Real generosity doesn't need an audience. That's a beautiful sentiment, David said, but it makes what happened to you at that dinner even harder to understand. His son-in-law called you a freeloader? In front of 10 people, including Walter and Diane. They laughed. Did your daughter defend you? That question hit harder than I expected. I was quiet for a moment. No, I finally said. She didn't. David let out a long breath. Mrs. Collins, I'd like to write this story. It speaks to something important about how we value people, about how we forget where we came from, about gratitude. But I need to do this responsibly. I'll need to reach out to the Moore family for comment before I publish. I understand. That means they're going to know this is coming. They're going to have time to prepare a response. Are you comfortable with that? Mr. Brown, I'm 72 years old. I've been comfortable with difficult conversations for a very long time. Fair enough, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I'm going to draft the article tonight and reach out to the Moores tomorrow morning. The story will run in Saturday's edition if everything goes according to schedule. That gives them Friday to respond. Saturday, I repeated, 2 days before Sunday service. Yes, he said quietly. I imagine Pastor Green might have something to say about this from the pulpit. I imagine he might. One more question, if you don't mind. What do you hope comes from this? Not revenge, you said. But what do you want? I thought about that carefully. It was the same question he'd asked earlier, but now it felt more important, more final. I want them to understand that people have value even when you don't know their whole story, I said slowly. I want my daughter to see that staying silent when someone treats your mother like trash has consequences. And I want Walter and Diane to know that the life they've built, the reputation they've cultivated, exists because someone helped them when they had nothing, someone they mocked without even knowing it. That's honest, David said. I appreciate that. There's one more thing, I added. What's that? I want anyone who's ever been called a burden, anyone who's ever been dismissed or underestimated, to know that quiet people aren't powerless. We just choose our moments carefully. He was quiet for a second. I'm going to use that quote, he said finally. That's the heart of this whole story right there. Use whatever you need, I told him. After we hung up, I sat in my living room as the winter light faded outside my window. Tomorrow, David would call the Moores. He'd ask them for comment. He'd tell them the story was running. And they'd finally understand why I'd left that dinner so calmly. I tried to imagine the conversation. Walter answering his phone, hearing a reporter's voice. Mr. Moore, I'm writing a story about your medical crisis in 2008 and the hospital administrator who saved you from bankruptcy. Would he remember that time? Would he recall the mysterious donor, the sudden resolution of their financial nightmare? And then, the question that would change everything. Did you know that administrator was Tracy Collins, your son-in-law's mother-in-law? I wondered if Diane would cry, if Walter would go pale, if they'd sit down heavily, the weight of realization crushing down on them. They'd think back to Christmas night, to Andrew's toast, to their own laughter. Pathetic freeloader. They'd remember me sitting at the far end of the table, silent and dignified, while their son tore me apart for entertainment. And they'd realize what I'd known all along, that I wasn't helpless, that I'd never been a burden, that the only reason they had anything to laugh about was because of what I'd done. My phone buzzed, a text message from Wendy. Mom, are you okay? You left so suddenly last night. Andrew feels bad about the joke. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time. A joke. That's what she was calling it. A joke. I didn't respond. Instead, I got up, made myself dinner, and ate slowly at my kitchen table. I washed my dishes. I read a few chapters of my book. I got ready for bed. And I thought about tomorrow. Tomorrow, a reporter would make phone calls. Tomorrow, a foundation board would have difficult conversations. Tomorrow, Pastor Green would finalize whatever he planned to say on Sunday. Tomorrow, the first domino would fall. And by Saturday morning, when that newspaper hit doorsteps all across the community, Walter and Diane Moore would wake up to a very different world than the one they'd gone to sleep in. A world where everyone knew the truth. A world where their carefully constructed image of being self-made would crumble like tissue paper. A world where the woman they'd allowed their son to humiliate was revealed to be the very reason they had a world at all. I turned off the lights and went to bed. Sleep came easily. For the first time in years, my conscience was completely clear. Saturday morning came quietly. I woke up early, made my coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with the newspaper I'd picked up from the lobby downstairs. It was 6:30 in the morning, and the winter sun was just starting to lighten the sky. I unfolded the paper slowly. There, on the front page of the local section, was the headline, Local couple's secret medical angel finally identified after 15 years. Below it was a photograph of Walter and Diane at some charity gala, both of them in formal wear, smiling for the camera. They looked successful, confident, untouchable. I started reading. David Brown had written it beautifully. He opened with the story of Walter's accident in 2008, the mounting medical bills, the insurance denials. He described the crisis they'd faced, how close they'd come to losing their home, their savings, everything. Then he revealed the mysterious intervention. The hospital administrator who had spent weeks restructuring their case, negotiating with insurance companies, securing emergency foundation funding. The anonymous work that had saved them. My name appeared about halfway through the article. Plain and simple. Tracy Collins, a senior administrator at Cook County Hospital at the time, worked more than 40 hours beyond her regular duties to resolve the Moore family's crisis. She did so anonymously, never seeking recognition or thanks. The article quoted Janet Riley extensively. She'd given David detailed information about the Foundation's involvement, about the complexity of the case, about how unusual it was for one administrator to invest so much personal time in a single family. Pastor Green was quoted too. Tracy Collins embodies the kind of quiet generosity that builds communities. She helped when no one was watching, expecting nothing in return. That's the purest form of giving. And then, near the end, came the part that would hurt. According to multiple sources, this connection recently came to light following an incident at a holiday dinner where Mrs. Collins, now retired and 72 years old, was publicly insulted and called a freeloader by Walter and Diane Moore's son-in-law, Andrew Thompson. The comment was reportedly made in front of the entire family, including the Moores themselves, who were unaware of Mrs. Collins's role in their financial recovery. The article concluded with my quote from the phone call. "Quiet people aren't powerless, we just choose our moments carefully." I set the paper down and sipped my coffee. It was done. The truth was out there now, printed in black ink on white paper, sitting on doorsteps all across the community. My phone started ringing at 7:15. The first call was from my friend Denise. "Tracy, have you seen the paper?" "I have." "Oh my Lord. Everyone's going to be talking about this, the whole neighborhood. I'm bringing it to book club on Tuesday, you know that, right?" "I figured you might." The calls kept coming. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months, former co-workers from the hospital, people from church. Everyone wanted to know if it was true, if I was okay, what the family had said. I answered some calls and let others go to voicemail. At 8:30, Wendy called. I stared at her name on the screen for 3 rings before I answered. "Mom," her voice was shaking. "Have you seen the paper?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell any of us?" "Would it have mattered?" I asked calmly. "Would Andrew have treated me any differently if he'd known?" She was quiet. "Mom, his phone hasn't stopped ringing since 6 this morning. People from the foundation, people from church, business associates. Everyone saw the article." I imagine they did. Walter and Diane are devastated. They had no idea. They're beside themselves. "I'm sure they are." "And Andrew." She trailed off. "What about Andrew?" I asked. "He's saying this is all blown out of proportion, that it was just one comment, one bad joke, and you've turned it into this huge public thing. He says you're trying to ruin his reputation." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "Wendy, let me be very clear. I didn't ruin anything. I simply told the truth. The truth about what I did for his parents 15 years ago. The truth about how he treated me 3 nights ago. Those are facts. If his reputation suffers because of facts, that's not my doing. But people are calling him ungrateful, cruel. Someone from the foundation already left a message saying they need to talk to Walter about his board position." "Good." "Mom, what did you want me to do, Wendy?" My voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath it. "Sit there and take it? Let him call me names in front of his parents, in front of your children, and just accept it? I spent 15 years keeping that family's secret. I never asked for anything. And the moment they had a chance to show me basic respect, they failed. All of them, including you." She started crying. I know I should have said something. I should have stood up for you." "Yes, you should have." "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." "I believe you are, but sorry doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change what needs to happen now." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your husband and his parents need to face the consequences of their choices. They need to understand that treating people like burdens has a cost, and you need to decide who you want to be. The woman who stays silent while her mother is humiliated, or someone stronger than that?" She was crying harder now. "Can I come see you? Can we talk about this in person?" "Not today," I said. "I think you need to sit with this for a while. Think about what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward, because it can't be like it was." "Okay," she whispered. Okay. After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Collins, this is Andrew Moore. We need to talk. This has gotten completely out of hand. Please call me. I deleted the message without responding. Another text came through, this time from Walter's number. Tracy, please. We had no idea. We never would have let Andrew speak to you that way if we'd known. Can we meet? We need to apologize properly. I stared at that message for a long time. They wanted to apologize now that everyone knew. Now that their reputations were on the line. Now that the foundation was asking questions and the church community was watching. But where were the apologies 3 days ago when I walked out of that dinner alone? I didn't respond to Walter either. Instead, I got dressed, put on my coat, and decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. It was cold outside, but the air felt clean, clear. As I walked, I passed people I knew. Some nodded, some stopped to talk, asking if I was the Tracy Collins from the article. An older gentleman I'd never met shook my hand and said, "You're a good woman. Don't let anyone tell you different." By the time I got back to my apartment, I had 17 missed calls. 12 were from Andrew. 3 were from Walter. 2 were from Wendy. I made myself lunch and sat down with my book. Let them call. Let them worry. Let them finally understand what it feels like to need something from someone and have that person choose silence. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow, everyone would be at church. And tomorrow, Pastor Green would have his say. The real reckoning hadn't even started yet. Sunday morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I hadn't planned to go to church. After the article, after all the phone calls, after everything that had happened, part of me just wanted to stay home, stay quiet, let other people deal with the aftermath. But then Pastor Green called at 7:30. "Tracy," he said gently, "I think you should be here today if you're able." "I don't know, Michael, it's going to be uncomfortable." "It might be," he agreed, "but I think it's important, not for them, for you." Something in his voice made me pause. "What are you planning to say?" "The truth," he said simply. "Just the truth." So I got dressed. I put on a simple navy dress, nothing fancy, fixed my hair, put on the pearl earrings my mother had given me years ago, and I drove to church. The parking lot was fuller than usual. I recognized most of the cars. Walter and Diane's luxury sedan was there, parked in their usual spot near the front. Andrew and Wendy's car was beside it. I parked toward the back and sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. Through the window, I could see people heading inside, bundled against the cold. Some were carrying newspapers. I saw 2 women standing by the entrance, talking in low voices, one of them pointing at something in the paper. The article was still spreading, still being discussed. I got out of my car and walked toward the church entrance. A few people I knew nodded at me. Mrs. Patterson from the choir touched my arm as I passed. "Bless you, Tracy," she whispered. Inside, the sanctuary was packed. More people than I'd seen at a regular Sunday service in months. Word had clearly gotten around. I looked toward the front. Walter and Diane sat in their usual pew, 3rd row from the front on the right side. They looked smaller somehow. Diane's shoulders were hunched forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Walter stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Andrew and Wendy sat beside them. Andrew's face was red. Whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. Wendy kept glancing around nervously, like she could feel every eye in the room on her family. Which they probably could. I walked down the center aisle and found a seat about halfway back. I didn't try to hide. I didn't sit in the back corner. I took my place and folded my hands in my lap. People turned when they saw me. Some smiled, some nodded with respect. A man I barely knew leaned over and whispered, "Good for you." The service began normally. We sang hymns, we prayed. Pastor Green delivered a sermon about gratitude and humility. His words were careful, measured, but I could feel the tension building in the room. Everyone knew something was coming. After the sermon, Pastor Green walked back to the pulpit. He cleared his throat and looked out at the congregation. "Before we close today," he said, his voice carrying through the sanctuary, There's something important we need to acknowledge as a community." The room went completely still. "Many of you read yesterday's article about a family in crisis and the person who helped them anonymously 15 years ago. That family is part of this church. That helper is also part of this church." He looked directly at me. "Tracy Collins, would you please stand?" My heart jumped into my throat. I hadn't expected this. Slowly, I stood. The congregation turned to look at me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but I kept my spine straight. "For those who don't know the full story," Pastor Green continued, "Tracy worked for over 6 weeks to save a family from financial ruin after a medical crisis. She did it quietly. She did it without recognition. She did it because she believed it was the right thing to do." He paused, letting his words settle. That family was Walter and Diane Moore. Every head in the room turned toward the front pew. Walter and Diane both looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. Tracy never told them what she'd done. She never asked for thanks. She simply helped and moved on with her life. That is the purest form of Christian charity. Giving without expectation. Helping without seeking praise. Pastor Green's voice grew firmer. "But it has come to my attention that very recently, this same woman, who saved this family from losing everything, was spoken to in a way that does not reflect the values we claim to hold. I won't repeat the exact words here, but I will say this." He looked around the room, making eye contact with different people. "How we treat those who have helped us, especially when we don't know the full story, says everything about our character. More than any donation we make, more than any volunteer work we do, more than any position we hold in the community." The silence in that room was deafening. We live in a world that measures people by what they have, by their job titles, by their bank accounts, by their success, but the gospel teaches us something different. It teaches us that the greatest among us are often the servants, the helpers, the quiet ones who move through the world doing good without needing applause. He turned to look at Walter and Diane directly. "I challenge each of us today to think about the people in our lives we might have underestimated, the people we might have dismissed, the people who have helped us in ways we never knew about." Then he looked back at me, his eyes kind. "Tracy, on behalf of this church and this community, thank you. Thank you for showing us what real generosity looks like." The congregation began to applaud. It started slowly, just a few people, but then it spread through the sanctuary like a wave. People stood. The applause grew louder. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them back. I nodded, acknowledging the moment, and then I sat down. The service ended a few minutes later. As people filed out, a crowd formed around me immediately, hands reaching to shake mine, people hugging me. Someone I'd never met told me, "My sister was helped by the hospital foundation years ago. People like you make a real difference." An older woman squeezed my hand. "Don't you let anyone make you feel small ever again." Through the crowd, I could see Walter and Diane standing near their pew. They weren't moving toward the exit. They were waiting. Andrew stood beside them, his face a mixture of shame and anger. Wendy had tears running down her cheeks. When the crowd around me finally thinned, Walter and Diane approached slowly. Walter stopped a few feet away from me. His voice came out hoarse. "Tracy, why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him calmly. "Because it wasn't about me, Walter. You needed help. I could provide it. That should have been the end of the story." Diane's eyes filled with tears. "We let our son talk to you like—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You did more than let him," I said quietly. "You laughed. You agreed. You made me feel like I was exactly what he called me." Walter swallowed hard. "We had no idea that you had ever done anything for us, if we'd known." "That's exactly the problem," I interrupted gently. "You treated me like a burden because you didn't know my value, but people have worth even when you don't know their whole story. That's what you failed to understand." I looked past them to Andrew and Wendy. Andrew couldn't meet my eyes. Wendy was openly crying. "This isn't about one comment at one dinner," I continued. "This is about years of being treated like I don't matter, like I'm some weight you have to carry. The Christmas dinner was just the moment you said out loud what you'd been thinking all along." "Tracy, please," Diane whispered. We're so sorry. We want to make this right." "I don't know if you can," I said honestly, "but that's something you'll have to figure out on your own." I picked up my purse and walked past them toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear Diane crying softly. Outside, the winter air felt clean and sharp. People were still talking in small groups in the parking lot, newspapers tucked under arms, voices low but animated. I got into my car and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. It was done. The truth was out. The community knew. The family knew. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the rest of Sunday quietly. I made myself lunch, read my book, and tried not to think about the church service or the looks on their faces. But by Monday afternoon, I knew the conversation was coming. Wendy showed up at my apartment at 3 o'clock. I watched through my window as she parked on the street, sat in her car for a full 5 minutes, and then finally got out and walked to my building. When she knocked, I took my time getting to the door. She stood in the hallway looking like she'd aged 10 years in a week. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her hair wasn't styled the way she usually kept it. She wore jeans and an old sweater, nothing like the polished outfits she normally wore. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "can I come in?" I stepped aside and let her enter. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd opened that folder on Christmas night, the same table where I'd planned everything that had followed. Wendy couldn't look at me at first. She twisted her hands together, staring at the table surface. "I don't even know where to start," she finally said. "Start with the truth," I told her. "That's always a good place." She looked up, tears already forming. "I should have defended you. At that dinner, when Andrew said those horrible things, I should have stood up and told him he was wrong." "Told everyone he was wrong?" "Yes, you should have." "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of making a scene, afraid of embarrassing Andrew in front of his parents and their guests, afraid of the fight we'd have later if I contradicted him." "So you chose him over me." "I chose the easy path," she said, wiping her eyes. "I chose not to make waves, and I let my husband tear you down in front of our children, in front of everyone, and I said nothing. I let her words hang in the air." "Do you know what that felt like?" I asked quietly. Sitting at that table, hearing those words, and looking at my own daughter for help, only to see her look away? Wendy started crying harder. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I've thought about that moment every single day since. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face. The way you stayed so calm. The way you just left without fighting back." "I didn't need to fight back," I said. "I had something better than words." "The truth," she whispered. "Yes, the truth." She pulled a tissue from her purse and dabbed at her eyes. "Andrew is furious. He says you've ruined his reputation, that you've made him look ungrateful and cruel to the entire community." "I didn't make him look like anything," I said firmly. "I simply revealed what was already there. His words, his actions, his character. His parents are devastated. Walter stepped down from the foundation board yesterday. Diane hasn't left the house since Sunday. They keep saying they had no idea, that they never would have laughed if they'd known. But they didn't know," I pointed out. "And that's exactly the problem, Wendy. They treated me poorly because they didn't think I had value. Because they assumed I was exactly what Andrew called me. A burden, someone taking and never giving. But you gave them everything," Wendy said, her voice rising. "You saved them. You spent weeks working on their case. You pulled strings and called in favors and fought for them, and they never even knew." "That's right. They didn't know. Which means the way they treated me was based entirely on who they thought I was, not who I actually am, and that tells you everything about their character." Wendy was quiet for a long moment. What Andrew said was unforgivable. It was certainly revealing. "He wants to apologize. He's been calling you non-stop." "I know. I've deleted every message." "Mom, please. He knows he messed up. He's sorry." I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. "Wendy, let me ask you something. Is Andrew sorry for what he said? Or is he sorry that everyone found out what kind of person he really is?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. She couldn't answer. "That's what I thought," I said gently. "What do you want from us? Wendy asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "What can we do to fix this?" "I want you to understand something," I said, leaning forward. "Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were. You let your husband disrespect me because it was easier than standing up to him. That tells me where your priorities are." "My priorities were wrong," she said quickly. "I see that now. I should have defended you. I should have been the daughter you raised me to be." "Yes, you should have." "Can you forgive me?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold and trembling. "Yes," I said. "I can forgive you. You're my daughter. I love you. But forgiveness comes with conditions this time." "Anything," she said. "I'll do anything. I need to know that you'll stand up for me going forward, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you something. I need to know that the next time someone disrespects me, whether it's your husband or anyone else, you'll speak up." "I will. I promise I will. And I need you to understand that my relationship with Andrew is over. He made his opinion of me very clear. I don't need his apologies. I don't need his explanations. I'm done with him." Wendy nodded slowly. "I understand." "As for Walter and Diane," I continued, "they can live with the consequences of their choices. They spent years building a reputation on a foundation they didn't even know existed. Now everyone knows the truth. That's not punishment. That's just reality catching up. They want to see you. To apologize properly." "Maybe someday," I said, "but not now. Right now they need to sit with what they've done. They need to understand that respect isn't something you give only after you know someone's value. It's something you give because every person deserves it." Wendy squeezed my hand. "You're so much stronger than I ever realized." "I've always been strong," I said quietly. "You just weren't paying attention." She stayed for another hour. We talked about what came next, about boundaries and expectations, about how she was going to handle things with Andrew. "He's changed since the article came out," she admitted. "People have been avoiding him. Business contacts are suddenly too busy to meet. The charity events we usually attend, we're not getting invitations anymore. That's what happens when people see who you really are." "He blames you." "Of course he does. It's easier than blaming himself." When Wendy finally left, she hugged me tightly at the door. "I love you, Mom, and I'm going to be better. I promise." "I hope so, sweetheart. I really do." After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something settle in my chest. The confrontation was done. The truth was spoken. The terms were set. Now came the aftermath. And I had a feeling that was going to be the most satisfying part of all. The consequences for Andrew came faster than I expected. By Tuesday, Wendy called to tell me that 2 of Andrew's biggest business clients had pulled their accounts. They didn't give detailed explanations. Just polite emails about going in a different direction and reassessing their partnerships. By Wednesday, the country club where Andrew played golf every weekend sent a letter. Something about membership review and community standards. Walter's membership was also under scrutiny. By Thursday, Andrew's name was quietly removed from the charity gala committee he'd been so proud to serve on. The interesting thing about reputation is that it takes years to build and only days to lose. Andrew had spent his entire adult life crafting an image, successful, generous, a pillar of the community, just like his father. But images are fragile things, and once people see the truth underneath, they can't unsee it. My friend Denise kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip. She'd call every evening with new developments. "Tracy, you won't believe what happened at the grocery store today," she said on Thursday night. "I saw Diane Moore in the produce section. She looked right at me and then turned and walked the other way. Actually walked away rather than talk to me." "People are embarrassed," I said. "They should be. Everyone's talking about it. Karen Lewis told me that she'd always thought Andrew was arrogant, but never said anything because Walter and Diane were so well connected. Now she wishes she'd spoken up years ago." "That's how it works," I replied. "When someone powerful falls, suddenly everyone remembers all the little things they overlooked." The calls kept coming throughout the week. Former co-workers from the hospital reached out to tell me they'd always known I was special. Neighbors I barely spoke to stopped me on the street to say they'd read the article and were inspired by my story. Even Lily and James called me. Wendy let them use her phone on Friday evening. "Nana," Lily said, her voice small and serious, "I'm sorry about what Daddy said at Christmas." My heart squeezed. "Sweetheart, that's not your fault." "I know, but I should have said something. I should have told him it was mean." "You're 10 years old, honey. That's not your job. Mom says we need to be braver, that we need to stand up for people even when it's hard." "Your mom is right." James got on the phone next. "Nana, are you ever coming back to our house?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know yet, buddy, but you can always come visit me, anytime you want." "Dad's been really quiet," he said. "He stays in his office a lot now." After I hung up, I sat with that information. Andrew hiding in his office, the kids noticing, the whole family structure shifting under the weight of truth. Saturday morning, I went to the farmer's market like I did every weekend. I was looking at apples when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Tracy." I turned. Walter stood there, alone. He looked older than he had at church, tired. His expensive coat hung on him like it was too big. "Walter," I acknowledged. "May I talk to you for a moment?" I glanced around. People were watching us. The produce vendor was clearly listening. "This isn't really the place." "Please, just 2 minutes." I nodded toward a bench near the edge of the market. We walked over and sat down, leaving space between us. Walter stared at his hands. "I've spent the last week trying to understand how this happened, how we got here." "It's pretty simple," I said. "Your son treated me terribly, and you laughed." "We didn't know," he said quietly. "That's the point, Walter. You didn't know because you never asked. You never wondered. You just assumed I had nothing to offer, that I was exactly what Andrew said. Someone taking advantage of your family's success." "I'm ashamed," he admitted. "Diane and I have been going over that dinner in our heads constantly. The things Andrew said, the way we reacted. We keep asking ourselves how we could have been so blind." "You weren't blind. You saw exactly what you wanted to see." He flinched but didn't argue. "The foundation asked me to step down, did you know that?" I heard. "They said it wasn't about punishment. They said it was about integrity, about whether I truly understood the mission of helping people in crisis when I'd treated you so poorly." "They're right." "I know they are." He looked at me finally. "I want you to know something. Diane and I have set up a fund at the hospital in your name. For families in medical crisis, who need help with billing and insurance advocacy. We're funding it for the next 10 years. I was surprised, but I kept my face neutral. "That's generous." "It's the least we can do. It'll never make up for what we allowed to happen, but maybe it will honor what you did for us." "Walter, if you're doing this to repair your reputation, it won't work." "I'm doing it because it's right," he said firmly. "Because you saved us, and we let our son mock you for it. Because we owe you more than we could ever repay. And this is a start." I studied his face. He looked sincere. Broken, maybe, but sincere. "Then I think it's a good thing," I said carefully. "A lot of families will benefit from that fund." "Will you ever be able to forgive us?" he asked. "Maybe," I said honestly, "but forgiveness takes time, and it requires change. Real change, not just donations and public gestures, but actual shifts in how you see people and treat them." "We're trying," he said. "Diane barely sleeps. She keeps saying she can't believe she let this happen, that she should have known better." "She should have." He nodded, accepting the weight of those words. "And Andrew? What about him? Will you ever speak to him again?" I looked out at the market, at people shopping for vegetables and bread, living their normal Saturday lives. "I don't know," I said. "That's up to him. If he truly understands what he did wrong and changes, maybe. But I'm not holding my breath." Walter stood slowly. "Thank you for talking to me. I know I don't deserve your time." "You're right, you don't. But I gave it to you anyway. That should tell you something about who I am." He nodded, understanding. "It does. It tells me everything we should have known 15 years ago." He walked away, shoulders hunched against the November cold. I sat on that bench for a while longer, watching the market bustle around me. The truth was out. The consequences were real. Andrew's perfect life was crumbling. Walter and Diane were facing their failures. Wendy was learning to stand up for herself. And me? I was sitting on a bench at a farmer's market, feeling more at peace than I had in years. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it just looks like the truth finally being told. And sometimes that's enough. 3 weeks after the article ran, life had settled into a new rhythm. Not the old normal, something different, something clearer. Wendy started coming by every Thursday afternoon. We'd have tea and talk, really talk, without Andrew hovering in the background or his parents' expectations weighing on every word. She told me about the changes happening in her marriage, how Andrew was going to therapy now, how he was beginning to understand the damage his arrogance had caused. "He's different," she said one Thursday. "Quieter. He actually listens now instead of just waiting to talk." "That's a start," I said carefully. "He asked about you yesterday, asked if you'd ever be willing to meet with him. What did you tell him?" "I told him that's not my decision to make, that he hurt you, and you get to decide if and when you're ready to hear from him." I nodded. "Good answer." She smiled a little. "I'm learning. Slowly, but I'm learning." The truth was, I didn't know if I'd ever sit down with Andrew. Part of me felt like the lesson had already been taught. He'd called me a freeloader in front of everyone, and now everyone knew who had actually been doing the taking. That might be enough. But another part of me, the part that had raised a daughter and worked with struggling families for 35 years, knew that people could change. Sometimes, if they truly wanted to. I just wasn't sure Andrew wanted to badly enough yet. The consequences for him continued to pile up. His business had lost nearly 40% of its client base. The networking groups he'd been part of had quietly stopped including him in meetings. Even his golf buddies had become suddenly busy whenever he called. Walter and Diane's world had shifted too. The charity circuit that had been their social foundation had become uncomfortable. People were polite, but the warmth was gone. The automatic invitations had stopped coming. Their names still carried weight, but now it carried questions too. The fund they'd set up in my name was real, though. Janet Riley called to tell me about the first family who'd received help, a young mother whose husband had been injured at work. The kind of case that could destroy a family financially. "They're going to be okay because of this fund," Janet said. "Because of you." "Because of Walter and Diane's donation," I corrected. "No," Janet said firmly, "because you showed them what real generosity looks like 15 years ago. This fund exists because of that example. Don't diminish your role in this." I suppose she was right. One Saturday afternoon in early December, I was at my kitchen table working on a puzzle when someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and was surprised to see Andrew standing there. Alone. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Andrew." "Tracy." He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes. His expensive coat looked wrong on him now, like a costume that didn't fit anymore. "I know I don't have any right to be here. Wendy doesn't even know I came. But I needed to talk to you." "So talk." He shifted uncomfortably in the hallway. "Can I come in?" "No," I said simply. "You can say whatever you need to say from right there." He swallowed hard, nodded. "Okay. Fair." He took a breath. "I came to apologize. Not because people are watching or because it'll fix my reputation. I came because what I said to you at that dinner was wrong. It was cruel and arrogant and completely inaccurate." Yes, it was. I've spent my whole life measuring people by what they could do for me. By their status, their connections, their money. I looked at you and saw someone who didn't fit into my world, so I decided you didn't have value. "That's an honest assessment," I said. "I was wrong. You had more value than anyone at that table, and I was too blind to see it. Too stupid. Too caught up in my own ego." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Andrew, I appreciate the apology, but I need to know something. Are you sorry for what you said, or are you sorry for what it cost you?" He looked at me for a long moment. 3 weeks ago, I would have said I was sorry for what it cost me. That would have been the honest answer. But I've had a lot of time to think. To really think about the person I've become. And the truth is, I'm sorry for both. I'm sorry I hurt you, and I'm sorry I'm the kind of person who would do that in the first place. That's more honest. I can't undo what I said. I can't take back that night. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be different, better. I'm in therapy. I'm working on understanding why I treat people the way I do. Why I need to feel superior all the time. Good, I said. You should do those things, not for me, but for yourself, and for Wendy and those kids. Will you ever forgive me? I thought about that question. Really thought about it. Maybe someday, I said finally, but not today. Today, you still need to sit with what you did. You need to feel the full weight of how you treated someone who saved your parents. Someone who helped your family without asking for anything in return. I understand. And Andrew, if you ever speak to me that way again, or if you ever treat my daughter the way you treated me, there won't be an article next time. There will just be silence. Permanent silence. Do you understand? Yes, he said quietly. I understand. Good, now go home. He nodded and turned to leave. Then he stopped. Thank you for listening. I know I didn't deserve even that. No, I agreed. You didn't. I closed the door and went back to my puzzle. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, I sat in my favorite chair by the window with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. 4 weeks ago, I'd sat at a Christmas dinner table and been called a pathetic freeloader. I'd been humiliated in front of wealthy people who thought they were better than me. People who thought their money and status made them important while I was just a burden. And now they knew the truth. Now the whole community knew what I'd done, who I really was, what I was capable of. I'd learned something important through all of this. Revenge doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. I didn't need to yell or scheme or manipulate. I just needed to open a folder, make a few phone calls, and let facts do what facts do best. Tell the story exactly as it happened. The consequences had followed naturally. Andrew's reputation crumbled because people finally saw his character clearly. Walter and Diane faced embarrassment because their treatment of me was exposed. The community responded because they understood, instinctively, that gratitude matters. None of that was revenge. That was just accountability. I finished my tea and looked out at the city lights beginning to glow in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Andrew was probably still struggling with what he'd lost. Walter and Diane were probably still avoiding social events. Wendy was probably tucking the kids into bed and thinking about the mother she wanted to become. And me? I was exactly where I wanted to be, in my small apartment, surrounded by things I'd earned and paid for myself, with my dignity intact and my conscience clear. At 72 years old, I'd learned that the quietest people often carry the most power. We just choose our moments carefully. We wait, we watch, and when the time is right, we act. Not with anger, not with malice, just with truth. And sometimes, truth is the most devastating weapon of all. I stood up, rinsed my teacup, and got ready for bed. Tomorrow was Sunday. I'd go to church, sit in my usual spot, and hold my head high, because I had nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing at all. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever been dismissed by people who thought they were better than you? Have you ever kept quiet while someone tore you down, knowing that one day the truth would come out? If you have, drop a comment below. Share your story. Let other people know they're not alone. And if this story meant something to you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been called names, or treated poorly, or made to feel small by people who should know better. Subscribe to this channel, because every story I tell is about people like us. People who don't make noise. People who move quietly through the world doing good. People who wait for the right moment to show everyone exactly who they are. Remember this, the person you're dismissing today might be the only reason you have anything tomorrow. And when that truth comes out, no amount of money or status will protect you from it. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that dignity, patience, and truth are more powerful than any insult someone can throw at you. Stay strong, stay quiet when you need to, and strike when the moment is right. Until next time.